give this keynote lecture at this wonderful conference. And I will now share my screen. Am I clear? Can you hear me?
Okay, Professor Josine, can you allow me to introduce you to our audience? Yes. So, dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to introduce to you the keynote speaker of our conference, Professor Josine Blok, who will speak to us about citizenship regimes in ancient Greece. Actually, I don't want to steal too much time from her lecture, which will provide us with an Ariadne's thread to guide us through the ever-growing maze of ancient practices and modern approaches present today in the studies of ancient Greek citizenship. Josine Blok's long research experience in this field and their contribution to this topic are certainly well known to the participants of this conference. However, it is good to spend a few words about her work for the sake of the wider audience that is following this keynote lecture via live streaming. Since 2001, Josine Blok has been professor and currently research affiliate on ancient history and classical civilization at the University of Utrecht, the Netherlands. She is also chair of the European Network for the Study of Ancient Greek History and member of several advisory boards and scientific committees of international journals and projects with a focus on ancient history, but also on interdisciplinary fields. Currently, Josine Blok is project leader and researcher of the Anchoring Innovation Project, where classicists are involved in investigating the human factor in successful innovation, testing the concept of anchoring as a new thinking tool. The inexhaustible topic of Athenian citizenship has been explored by Josine Blok over a long period of time and in many publications, touching upon different aspects related to the shaping of citizen identity, such as gender, religion, economy, social behaviors, and so on. Her monograph, published in 2017, Citizenship in Classical Athens, represents a methodological turning point, which every scholar of Athenian citizenship had to deal with today. Here, Josine Blok has challenged the traditional interpretation on Athenian politeia, which has been excessively biased by the Aristotelian view of the citizen of citizenship as participation in political offices. This long-standing view, in which true politeia was essentially limited to adult male citizens, largely obscured the role of lineage, citizen women, religious participation, and other fundamental components of the Athenian citizen's identity, which Josine Blok has brought back to light in this book. And now I close reminding you that at the end of the lecture, it will be possible to address questions to Josine Blok. The ways are the same for participants. Type question into the chat or type the entire text of your question. Non-participants who are following the live streaming can type their questions into the chat of YouTube. And now, finally, I am very glad to give the floor to Josine Blok. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chiara. In the past 20 years, studies of citizenship in ancient Greece have multiplied. Of course, citizenship has always been a central topic of our field, given that in ancient Greece, the citizen state was the quintessential type of polity. Yet, not only in our domain, but citizenship studies overall are showing a notable surge. A major reason for this growth is probably the increase in voluntary and involuntary migration of the past decades. As you see here in these figures, Migration nearly doubled in these years, and in the past 50 years, the number of refugees grew even tenfold. Both the migrants and the receiving populations need to resituate themselves in a changing environment, and the question what it means to be a citizen offers itself with new urgency. The processes involved are based on formal regulations, but they also reveal the values attached to citizenship. Access to citizenship is therefore a crucial topic in comparative citizenship studies. For ancient Greece, as the organizers of this conference have described so well, the wealth of studies on citizenship display an immense variety of civic practices. In equal measure, these studies reveal fundamental differences among historians about the meaning of status, law, and values in citizenship, following either an anthropological approach, which focuses on patterns of inclusion, values, and informal norms, or a legal historical approach, with its emphasis on institutions formalized in law. If we want to identify larger patterns in Greek citizenship that still do justice to this diversity, we need a methodology that accommodates both approaches. In a brilliant article of 2014 on the concept of politeia and the privileges granted to outsiders, Crystal Müller has broken new ground for precisely such a methodology, bringing the components law and values in the study of citizenship together. In my contribution today, I will continue Crystal's line of thought, but I will do so in a different way. I will draw on definitions and concepts developed in citizenship studies, which focus on access to citizenship and on its counterpart, loss of citizenship, namely citizenship and citizenship regimes. Definitions matter. The solid concept of citizenship matters for those who are citizens and those who are not, and it matters for us as scholars to create a common ground for our debates. I will use primarily a recent synthesis by Maarten Vink from 2017, which investigates how citizenship systems may be compared, and further some views of other political scientists. All this work deals with present-day citizenship and the risks of applying modern concepts to ancient societies are notorious. To mention just one essential difference that will recur in my talk, present-day citizenship is first and foremost a legal status to which anyone can, at least in principle, apply. It is an impersonal right. In Greek antiquity, citizenship was first and foremost a personal qualification, approved by the community for its members and occasionally bestowed on outsiders as a gift of honor. Yet, these differences are not absolute. Values are crucial to present-day citizenship too, and so were laws for citizenship in ancient Greece. When we take such differences into due account, modern concepts can be made useful for the study of antiquity. Much of what I will say is probably familiar to you, but I expect that the concepts I introduce will provide new perspectives and a way forward to a common ground. In this paper, I will first discuss the definitions of citizenship and of citizenship regimes I derive from Vink, weaving in some comments on ancient Greece. Next, I address some aspects of citizenship regimes in Greece in some depth, and finally I will apply those concepts to access to status and rights. All in all, my talk will be about 30 minutes. First definition is of citizenship, to which two essential conditions are added, and I read the whole that is now in front of you. A. Citizenship is a constitutive element of political community consisting of membership of this community and the benefits, rights, and duties attached to that status. And then B, citizenship is closely entwined with the self-determination of political communities, typically based in a permanently inhabited territory. And C, for political self-determination to be possible, the conception of membership, that is, of the group entitled to the benefits and rights of the political community, needs to be stable. I begin with a comment on the last point, condition C. When for political self-determination, the conception of membership needs to be stable, it does not mean that this conception is immutable or socially exclusive. For ancient Greece, we may add that for being stable, this conception did not need to be put in writing. Before written laws became common, stability of membership relied on unwritten institutions, conventions of inclusion in the shape of traditional ritual procedures. We may think here of entrance into a phratry, inclusion in the Andreion, and similar rituals in polis subgroups and at polis level. And I have added a few relevant references, just a few. But procedures they were, and the boundaries they created between citizens and others were meaningful. Many such rituals remained an essential feature of access to citizenship in later periods, when criteria of membership were fully formalized, usually in written law. Stability in the conception of membership and political self-determination converged when communities consolidated into polis, raising the much debated question when and how this began in the early Archaic period. In the Greek colonies, the process began in a different way from that of the so-called old communities, but after their foundation, both types of polis grew more alike. I would argue that when this formal stability in the conception of membership is lacking, or has no identifiable ties to political self-determination, we had better not speak of polis and citizenship, but use other terms. First part, A of the definition, means that membership of a political community is a formal status in the sense of socially recognized and stable, which is inherently tied to the content of that status. This content consists in modern terminology of benefits, rights, and duties. In ancient Greece, at least until the 4th century, rights that were enforceable in court were few. More common were claims, social positions, obligations, and privileges based on tradition and on the consent of the community. But this difference between ancient claims and modern rights does not affect their meaning tied to status in the context of citizenship. So for the sake of brevity, I will speak here simply of rights. In sum, citizenship always entails the nexus between membership, so status, and rights. We need to keep this fact in mind because rights can be granted to outsiders without the status of citizenship itself. This practice is common in modern states and was also widespread in ancient Greece, and I shall come back to this point in the last part of my talk. At this point, it is first worth noting that the kinds of rights that inherently belong to citizenship vary immensely as to time and place. Modern citizenship normally includes equality in the law and active political rights of all citizens, but historically this has certainly not been the case. In early modern Europe, for instance, urban citizenship usually entailed some social, legal, and economic rights, but only rarely political rights, and had little to nothing to do with equality. Since citizenship is tied to the political self-determination of a polity, some measure of political involvement may be at stake, but not necessarily so. Considering this historical variety, we may immediately wonder if there are any rights that appear in all types of citizenship. One such common right might be freedom. Universally, citizenship appears to be antithetical to slavery. Another right is some legal protection, whether just a modicum or extensively. All in all, for now, it is relevant to note that historically, legal equality and political rights are not intrinsic to the notion of citizenship. A great variety in rights is also evident within and between the Greek polis. As an acknowledged member of the polis, a citizen enjoyed the rights that the politeia assigned to him or her. For such rights, the politeia normally distinguished between citizens as to gender, age, birth, and wealth. All polis did so in somewhat different ways, which reveal that equality and political rights were not intrinsic to the Greek notion of citizenship either. In many oligarchies of the classical period, the demos were often not even consulted about policy decisions, let alone that they had access to offices. Even in democracies, not all citizens were eligible for all offices, either in principle or in effect. In many Eastern Greek polis, all male citizens normally could vote, but convention restricted eligibility for office to the upper layers of society. A situation comparable to that of the demos in oligarchies pertained to women citizens generally. Many politeia gave them rights of access to religious offices, and in the Hellenistic era to many honorific offices, but not to political ones. In a polis where male citizens normally had political rights, a man would lose them if he misbehaved or incurred debts to the state. Yet all these people were still citizens in terms of membership and other rights. In sum, political rights were one right among many that a polis could confer or withhold. In second definition, I want to discuss citizenship regimes built on the definition of citizenship. For this concept, we need to be aware that citizenship is not only a legal frame, but always is embedded in norms and values. Political sociologist Engin Ising, his name was already mentioned, points out that the legal status of citizenship elicits a specific citizen's agency, rooted in a typical habitus, ways of thought and conduct that are internalized over a relatively long period of time, a concept most famously theorized by Pierre Bourdieu. Rainer Baubuck, a political scientist working on migration, citizenship has a nominal side, that is, membership and rights, and a substantive side, which includes norms, values, and customs that are relevant or can be made relevant to citizenship. These theories capture in modern terminology what ancient political thinkers such as Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle observed about the so-called climate or soul of politeia. Yet the modern theories take this insight a step further when they observe that such norms and values deeply influence the nexus between membership and rights, and therefore access to citizenship, both for citizens and for outsiders. All of this leads to the definition of citizenship regimes, and I read again the whole. They are institutionalized systems of formal and informal norms that define access to membership, as well as rights and duties associated with membership within a polity. Let me now use a few aspects of this definition briefly for a few cases in ancient Greece. Elsewhere, I have argued more fully why I think that the relation between the individual and the polis was based on balanced reciprocity. Citizens were expected to contribute materially to their polis, to show loyalty, and to exert themselves for its welfare. In return, a citizen could expect generic rights and special honors fitting his or her contribution, depending on the politeia, within a foreseeable time span. This model also shaped the relations between the polis and others, both with the gods, whose contribution always outweighed what the polis could give in return, and with human outsiders with whom a more even balance could be achieved. In classical Athens, where we can observe such processes in detail, the informal norms for citizens' conduct developed into formal ones, which David Whitehead in his seminal article coined the cardinal virtues. And I have added translations for what they are worth. They are very difficult to translate, as you know. Citizens who displayed philotimia, love of honor or ambition, and andragathia, manly virtue or excellence, could receive public praise and special honors beyond the generic rights. Conversely, when a citizen allegedly broke the norms of conduct, it could be made into a court case to deprive him of or her of some rights. Examples are Demosthenes' attacks against Aeschines, but also the so-called entrenchment clauses of decrees, threatening any citizen speaking against the communal decision with loss of some rights, atimia. In the same manner, the value terms acclaiming outsiders for acts to the benefit and welfare of the polis developed into formal norms. Euergesia, well-doing, philia, friendship, enoia, being well-disposed, and again, andragathia. For showing these cardinal virtues, outsiders were rewarded with public praise, the honor of proxenia, which I translate here as the formal role of protector, and ultimately the honorific grant of citizenship. In the same article, Whitehead notes in the 5th and 4th centuries, the abstract virtues supplemented and gradually replaced commendable conduct cast as verbs or acts. Doing good and being a good man, so oner agathos, became andragathia, which replaced aristocratic sounding arete. In this inscription, you see both expressions used in one honorific decree. I should like to add a few observations to Whitehead's. First, doing good describes particular good deeds by a particular individual at a particular moment, but the abstraction andragathia conceptualizes a norm distinct from the concrete persons and events. On a par with these abstract virtues are the granted privileges cast as abstractions, such as atelia, freedom of tax and duties, prohetria, front row seats in the theatre, proxenia, enktesis, the right to own property. The earliest extant inscribed cases I found are from Crete, one of which the most famous contract that I do not show here of the Dataleis with the Mnemon Spensiphios, granting him and his descendants atelia. It dates to the last quarter of the 6th century, as does a decree from Gotin granting a certain Dionysios atelia for his euergesia that you see here. With both the virtue and the granted privilege cast as abstractions, this decree implies the existence of general norms for access to privilege, revealing institutionalization of a citizenship regime. Since our extant records are quite unevenly spread, partly due to the epigraphical habit and partly due to the coincidences of survival, these late 6th century decrees from Crete may be taken to represent a wider development of interpolis and international relations formalized in citizenship regimes. The same type of citizenship regime underlies the honorific decrees of the Hellenistic period, by which time the virtues and their rewards had grown into impressive lists. Second, use of abstractions beside or instead of concrete terms and verbs occurs across the spectrum of citizenship and governance vocabulary. An interesting example is the noun politeia, which emerged when citizenship already existed for several centuries. Its meaning shifted over time from citizen sovereignty to constitution, to citizenship, to political agency, to urbane conduct. I am concerned here with politeia in the meaning citizenship, an abstraction which replaced citizenship cast in verbs of being a citizen and having a share that we find both in wider discourse and in some citizenship decrees, among which from Athens and Thassos. The abstract form politeia occurs only in the context of citizenship grants to outsiders, never, as far as I could see, for describing the status of a polis' own citizens. The earliest case of a grant with the formula to give politeia in a decree you see here, dating to around 400 from Ephesus. The clause isai kai homoiai, meaning on equal and equivalent terms, confirms that here citizenship is bestowed. In several polis, to give politeia became the standard formula, and in the Hellenistic era it abounds everywhere. In Athens, however, until 229 BC, politeia in the meaning citizenship by a grant was used only when referring to an event of the past. We gave him politeia. In actual grants, the clause of granting citizenship in decrees remained concrete, that he be an Athenian, so with the verb to be and the ethnic identity an Athenian. The continuity of this formula in Athens in the 4th century, when other polis used to give politeia, is the more striking when we observe that Athens did use politeia in decrees, in the meaning constitution, beside for citizenship giving in the past, as I just mentioned. In other words, the word politeia was current in Athens, but used in a different way from other polis in citizenship decrees. I would suggest that this discrepancy in vocabulary between decrees of classical Athens and elsewhere might be due to the fact that Athens began with formal grants of citizenship relatively early, in 478, that is, in a period when citizenship was cast in concrete terms as a matter of course, a clause which became entrenched as the ritual formula. Only after 229, Athens shifted to giving politeia. Now to access to status and right. Across ancient Greece, the stable conception of membership of the polis was based on birth from a citizen parent as criterion for access to the polis and its subgroups. By the late 7th century, the ritualized custom had solidified into a principle to which a growing body of rights and duties came to be attached, of which the Guten Code offers a rare inscribed example. The oldest parts of the Guten Code are dated to around 600, so contemporary with Solon's laws in Athens, holding a similar set of regulations. Significantly, the distinction between citizens and others and the inheritance rights of citizens are core topics in both. Over the centuries, birth as the criterion of descent was further tightened into double citizen lineage required for citizen status. In the classical and Hellenistic ages, this rule was implemented into citizenship regimes in many polis. The impact of the descent criterion on citizenship in ancient Greece fits a pattern observed in present-day comparative analysis, showing that the criterion of birth for citizen membership creates path dependency for subsequent legislation. It also feeds resistance against easy access to that status, for instance, to long-term residence. In sum, the social closure that is anyway typical of citizen status is reinforced by birth as a criterion of access. However, when rights and benefits are made available to outsiders, inclusion and exclusion are clearly not absolute categories, and this situation too we find in abundance in ancient Greece. Outsiders could become insiders in several ways, which largely, but not fully, coincide with stages of polis consolidation. All these routes were subsidiary to the descent principle, into which legal framework the new citizens subsequently fitted. First, in the Archaic Age, membership of cultic, social, or professional associations and settlement in the territory could gradually lead to inclusion. Such a process was probably most successful when supported by intermarriage, with access to citizenship for one's children, until the laws required double citizen parentage. Second, foundations of colonies and refoundations of existing polis included previous outsiders as citizens in the new setup, and there's a wonderful article by Cecchet about precisely this process. Third, when the concept of access by descent had become more firmly consolidated, roughly from around 500 BC onward, citizen status was given as a grant to outsiders, often to individuals and occasionally to collectives by mass grants, for instance by sympoliteia or isopoliteia. Such grants were normally cast as an honor bestowed on the recipient in recompense for shown virtues and benefits, often following previous honors. Often, the new citizens did not live in the territory of the polis, which had granted them citizenship, and were not even expected to do so. It was an open option. This remarkable situation distinguishes citizenship grants from the two previous routes of access, and also from any other historical comparison. More than anything else, it highlights the honorific nature of Greek citizenship. Finally, in the Hellenistic age, some polis sold their membership to outsiders in extraordinary measures due to depleted treasuries in these polis. Besides instituting these subsidiary means of access to citizenship, polis granted rights and benefits to outsiders without citizen status. In many polis, free non-citizens were living inside the territory, either previous inhabitants, such as the Carians in Halicarnassos, or immigrants, such as Cretans in Miletus. Sometimes a special status was created for such groups, of which the metoikoi, the metics in Athens, and the perioikoi of Sparta are best known. Last but not least, polis granted privileges to outsiders living elsewhere, in other polis and even kingdoms, a phenomenon that again illuminates the economy of honor of Greek citizenship. For these rights, we need to distinguish between generic rights and special honors, for rights for citizens and for outsiders, but at the same time, it's worth noticing the connections between them. Ateleia, the earliest privilege on record, was for outsiders alone, both at polis level and among polis subgroups, if I am not mistaken. And I know of only one probably opaque exception which may prove the rule. Enktesis was an honor for outsiders, while for citizens it was a generic right. In Athens, ctesis, public dining rights, and prohedria were honors for citizens in the 5th century, which by the later 4th century were also given to outsiders. And politeia, which at first meant the whole package of generic rights of citizens, acquired the special overtone of political agency when listed among a range of benefits in the Hellenistic honorific decrees for outsiders, as Christel Müller has shown. All these modes show different political dynamics of inclusion, for which I follow again Vink. In the honorific decrees of the classical age, which grants citizen status to individuals after giving a range of civic rights and privileges, citizen status can be understood to complement the rights. It is the one final step making the picture complete. In Hellenistic decrees, this complementary nature is less prominent because citizenship often came together with other honors in one go. A different situation applies when some or even many such rights are given to outsiders, but without citizen status. We find this situation on the one hand in decrees for individuals who receive several honors but no citizenship, and who often lived outside of the polis, and on the other hand in the status of outsiders who lived inside the polis, for instance the metics in Athens. In these cases, the grant of rights and benefits is an alternative to citizen status. Here again, there are instructive parallels with modern states. Comparative analysis shows that states which adopt an open attitude to, in particular, labor immigration, are usually restrictive in giving rights, most of all of citizen status to immigrants, whereas states that give many rights to immigrants are usually restrictive in admitting them. And Athens clearly matches the first type of regime. Now to my conclusion. We are all aware that applying modern concepts to ancient Greece may grossly distort our historical understanding of antiquity. This is no less true for citizenship. Yet I have argued that there is also a lot to be gained when we are fully aware of what the modern concepts entail and when we apply them not unconsciously, but in a deliberate comparative analysis. Clear definitions, provided they can accommodate the essential differences, may create the common ground that is necessary for a fruitful debate. The concept citizenship regime is a useful heuristic tool to clarify various modes of inclusion and exclusion in ancient Greece and in ancient Greek citizenship, from the Archaic Age to the late Hellenistic era. In so doing, the concept illuminates the particularity of Greek citizenship, not by looking at the Greek case in isolation and reflecting only on itself, but by comparing it with other citizenship regimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Josine Blok. Thank you from all of us for having drawn for us this brilliant map of Athenian citizenship, for having provided this thinking tool, a heuristic tool that is the concept of citizenship regimes. So I open the question time, and I ask participants to write a question or the text of their question into the chat. And we also wait for questions from the chat of YouTube. Okay. So Crystal Müller, you can unmute your microphone.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you so much, Josine, for this brilliant communication paper. I totally agree with you about the double, what you said in the conclusion about the double possible situation with a city open to immigration or a city open to civic rights in the case of Athens. And I think we can see it, and I hope we'll see it tomorrow with the confederacies as well. I just had a remark about enctesis, because I think enctesis as given to foreigners can be very different from what a citizen really is liable to do or authorized to buy, it's often limited in a lot. It entails, in fact, a lot of restrictions. For instance, in Athens, it can be limited to only the house, or it can be limited in the price of the house or the property. So it's not totally the same privilege as the one which is given by birth to the citizen. I'm saying that because one of my students, Julien Faguer, just wrote an article about this, and he is writing about that in his PhD, which is going to be published in Athens. But so this is one thing. And also about ateleia, I'm not sure we can be very certain about what a citizen is paying or not. And if there is such a difference between what a foreigner pays and what a citizen pays. You see that maybe ateleia can be part of citizenships. This is a problem. Ateleia is also a problem. There is an unpublished PhD in France by Aurélie Carrara about this ateleia thing. She's a student of Raymond Desca in Bordeaux, and that's one point that could be made. But I don't have formal answers to give, but I wanted to say these two things about antithesis and ateleia. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Crystal, for your additional information. Indeed, the rights as they are rarely fully overlap. There is often there is a slight difference, and I don't know exactly the difference between antithesis for foreigners and outsiders. For outsiders and citizens in other polis. I mean, it is a right that you find in so many places, but I readily believe that it was not exactly the same. Now, ateleia is indeed a very actually, I should like to read this unpublished dissertation that you mentioned, because I think it is an extremely interesting concept, because it is not just paying. It is also, it starts out by, it also includes all kinds of duties. For instance, as well, I'm not sure if Will Mack, yeah, he is still there. He knows that, for instance, a proxenos could be promised that he, when he would settle in Athens at some point, he could be freed from the duty to share in being a guard. That was also a form of ateleia, and such kind of things. And so, yes, telos is normally something like paying, but there are also kinds of duties of an immaterial kind. And it is what you are expected to contribute, materially or immaterially, as part of your membership of the group. And some of this could be, you could be relieved of this as a honor, as a grant.
But if I can add something, normally ateleia in inscriptions, especially in the Hellenistic period, it's mostly commercial ateleia. Except when it says ateleia ton panton or something like that, or panton crematon. But normally, I understand your point. I perfectly see your point. But in inscriptions, it seems to me it's more commercial than anything else. But the trouble here starts because we don't know exactly what the citizens had to pay or not. This is a very small point. But I understand what you mean by saying that what you telos is much bigger, and I'm going to talk about telos tomorrow. Telos is much bigger than just a commercial tax, of course.
If I may still respond one more time, I gladly believe what you say, that in Hellenistic inscriptions it is mainly about commercial payments. My point is that what ateleia exactly entails changes over time that is different in the Hellenistic era in some polis from what it entails, for instance, in Crete in the 6th century. What you see is the continuity of giving ateleia as an honor. That is my point. So I would like to move a bit away from all the differences, time and again, between the various historical periods and try and look at the bigger picture of what is actually developing as a citizenship regime across time. And that then, of course, things are different in Hellenistic era than from 6th century Crete. But it is the structure that matters here. That is what would be my main point.
A question from Lucia Cecchet. Please, Lucia.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Josine, for this great presentation and conceptual mapping, which will be very useful for us also the next days. I was wondering, just related on the project I'm working now, how should we interpret these several cases in the Hellenistic period, which become fewer in the imperial period, in which we have a listing of the single honors or rights, how we want to call them, so prohedria, enthesis, and the things we have mentioned so far, but in which politeia is not mentioned. How can we explain this absence in the light of the fact that in later period, imperial period, we do have the mention of the same honors, which become somehow stereotypical, but we have very often also the mention of politeia awarded to a recipient.
I think that Crystal's article is exactly about this, isn't it, Crystal?
Sorry, yes.
Your article is exactly about what Lucia is asking. What is politeia doing in that long list?
Well,
and so for the real answer, and particularly as I'm not a specialist on the Hellenistic area, as you know, I would gladly refer to Crystal. But what I would say is that if politeia is not there, clearly something is lacking. For instance, and if I got Crystal's meaning right, one of the things that is not given is, for instance, full political rights. There you have an emphasis on the political agency. And what is very remarkable, I think, is that listing all these rights and privileges, or whatever they are, has also a dynamic of its own. I mean, it has a kind of counterpart in the endless listing, for instance, in ephebic inscriptions of what the ephebes all have done. There is also a dynamic in the epigraphical habit itself. It's not just only that grants are added, but it's also a dynamic of listing things. See what I mean? But I wonder what I would rather divert your question to Crystal.
If I can just add a word, there are two explanations for this. The absence is clear. If you don't have politeia, there is something missing, which are the Archaic Greece according to Aristotle. It's very clear. But if it's there, it's very embarrassing, of course, because it seems that all the other rights, I don't like this word, but the rights are included already in politeia. So why do we have everything plus politeia? It's been explained by Louis Robert a long time ago that in this case, in fact, the honorandus is given the choice between the total, which is politeia with everything included in it, or just this or that or that or that. So it's not, it seems very strange for us, but it seems to be a choice. You have the choice between the whole thing, the package, or just one of the rights, and they say and they list all the rights to be very clear. You can choose to have this or that. There are only two possible explanations, but on an anthropological level, it's interesting to see that, because normally if you say politeia, you don't need to list the rest, but they do it. That's all we can say, they do it.
Thank you very much.
William Mack, please.
Hello, thank you so much for that fabulous paper and for bringing this crucial comparative lens in to show us, what happens when we sort of flatten the longue durée of Greek citizenship antiquity as a way of comparing it and identifying what is particular, what is different from other kinds of citizenship regimes from other historical periods. I just wonder, rather than picking up on any of the interesting points about honors, which are a particular obsession of mine, or privileges, as they've also called, I want to come to the point you were making about stable membership and the importance of that, and why without that we shouldn't call something a polis. And that struck me as being, well, a combination of a stable membership plus, I think you said, but correct me if I'm wrong, political self-determination. And this, as it was, made sense for me of something which always strikes me as very odd, and that is the history of Sicily, where you have, all of these stories of the citizen bodies changing all of the time, and also a very particular and distinct political trajectory to do with a lack of political determination. So if I can sort of package this up as a question and push it in your direction, does this model that you've set out and these sets of ideas from citizenship studies, do they help you? Do they have something to say about that, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it makes sense to say that for privileges, rights, honors, whatever you call them as, and I always think it is useful to, as I said, to distinguish between generic and extras. It only makes sense to have those when you have an idea of who might be entitled to have them and who is not. I mean, it has a kind of self-evidency about it. Now, that is not to say that it doesn't change, neither the composition of the group, nor the rules about it, about the situation. But if you would suppose that the system would be entirely open, and then it would be impossible to understand who is contributing what and who can claim what, and so on and so forth. So I'll say there are many definitions of citizenship, as you know, but they all say, well, whether you like it or not, but it is a system that needs some kind of closure to be understandable and to be workable. Now, again, and I think that Sicily might be a very interesting case to see how this works. I mean, this is also the first time that I've been really thinking about what this concept of citizenship regimes can do for us. But I would think that using the structure of that notion, but looking at the changes that you see across Sicily, that it would help understanding how these people regroup and form new kinds of communities, rather than stick with and say negotiate what they have from the outset and try to keep it like that or whatever. So indeed, I mean, there's so much upheaval and so much replacement of people, but at some point, well, I think that we all know these wonderful tokens from Camarina that you see, well, there they kind of stop crying and start again. I mean, and then the whole system begins anew. So they do need to have this kind of idea of who are their members. And occasionally it leads to another upheaval, but I think that is indispensable. But it could work well, I think, for understanding what happens on the ground in Sicily.
Thank you very much.
May I? Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Justine, for pointing this citizenship regime point in the discussion. That's a very interesting concept, allowing to take both parts of the legal and, let's say, the informal status. My question would be about the origin. Because you said, and William spoke about that also, that stability is important. So when do you think that we can use the word citizenship? Starting from when?
I think that differs from polis to polis, or from place to place. And also, indeed, well, as Will was just telling us, reminding us, it can also dissolve again. And it, whether by violence or by whatever happened, by moving, by whatever. But when this happens, you cannot say, well, this is the case in the Greek world from this moment on. Of course, I have been drawing very general lines, but the moment from which you can say, well, here we see more or less so much consolidation, so kind of growing stability, people know a bit their place, there are some rules of the game, there are even some offers or whatever you want to label as essential for the situation. That differs from place to place. And again, of course, the starting point of colonies is very different from the old world, or the old cities. But nonetheless, everywhere, this is entirely different. And usually we can see it best in Athens. That is boring, but effect. But similar processes are indeed detectable. Well, Gunnar mentioned very rightly Crete as an excellent case where you can see this process happening. And what is difficult to say is how much we can follow this, trace this process before we have any kind of reliable writing. But usually as soon as the first written laws appear, then it has already been underway for a while. So I would not say it is, I would never tag a particular time, but it is across the early Archaic age. You see it popping up bit by bit everywhere. That's the way I see it.
But in a way, it was already what Moons Hansen said, before 650, you cannot say anything because the word polis has not appeared. And so you would not apply the word to what I was speaking before, that, for example, Lefkandi, late 10th or mid 9th century.
I would not call that citizenship. No, I wouldn't. I think it is a community, there's a settlement, all of this, but there is no indication of any stability of the notion of membership. There's no clear indication of what membership entails for the members, duties and obligations towards each other. So indeed, that is a situation in which I should say, well, you see here a settlement, you see cohesion of some kind, you see whatever, common interests probably, but I would not call it citizenship yet. Otherwise, in my view, citizenship would lose its meaning. Well, you hinted at that yourself, that it can, and then it doesn't help anymore to use that word, in my view.
Yes, of course, there is the risk of diluting the concept, but stability is not a characteristic of Archaic Greece. So in that way, you won't use the word citizenship before quite late, I would say. except when you have the criteria you said. So that's why they should be. My point is that of course, if we are going too far back in time, we dilute the very meaning of citizenship, but we gain some tools in analyzing societies and the switching of settlements and so on. So there is a balance to be settled between the risk and the gain, the loss and the gain. So that was my point.
Any other questions from someone else? Now I would like to just point on the concept of stability, because it sounds pivotal in this reasoning. And I was thinking about this concept divided between a part pertaining to reality and the part pertaining to construction. Just like ethnicity is a construct. I mean, stability is a real stability or is a sort of cultural and social and political construction, sometimes an illusion of stability. What do you think about it?
I think that there is
possible comparison with the concept of ethnicity as a construction, stability as a construction, a discourse.
I mean, but it is a social construction. It is a sense of, you know, who belongs on which grounds to us and who doesn't. That is a mental construction. And ethnicity, I should say, is a kind of subcategory of that, a way of saying, well, because he or she belongs to this or that group. What I mean to say by stability is, again, it is not fixed. It does not mean that it is very rigorous, for instance, but you have to have a more or less stable view of who is this community, who is sharing in this. Well, we have talked about the idea of sharing. What we see, for instance, then you get also to this the kind of proto situations that Alain was asking about. We have together with Irat Malkin, together we are writing a book on the use of the lot in ancient Greece. And one of the things that you see very early on is the use of the lot in a particular group. And there is it essential who is in, who can participate in this procedure, and who is out. And this is not necessarily already, say, a whole polis context, but you have to know who is entitled to be here in some way and to share in this procedure. Now that is a way of knowing that, and how it comes about, this way of knowing that may be in zillion different ways it can come about. And in this variety of ways that this idea of a group comes about, at some point dissent became the leading principle. But there probably originally was more like living together in the same valley or whatever, you know. But you have to get an idea, and that idea is a feeling which is further institutionalized. So I wouldn't, if I would think about it, I would not say draw a line between construction and reality. The construction is the reality.
Yes, of course. It's not a sharp line, of course, but it's just a Jano. Janus. Okay. So, if there are no other questions, but I wait a while for.
Lucia has another one.
Yeah. Okay.
A very short one. This time. More focused on you, Josine. I certainly don't need to mention to you Pericles citizenship law. I was just thinking the role of birth in all this process that you have described, and also starting from the papers we heard earlier today, a very fluid process, but of definition, and a process in which different forces can compete to state and affirm their membership within the community. In the very moment in which the polis set out birth as a criterion to access the community, I would say that this process became way less fluid, and then citizenship can be accessed only, if not by birth, of course, only by concession of the polis as an award, of course.
Yes.
So I was just wondering how this birth criterion fits into the model and the map that you have excellent outlined today.
Well, I indeed, I already mentioned it in my talk. I think, but we cannot see this historically. We can only speculate looking backwards. But I think that the role of birth became as a practice, as it is actually universally the case, that people say, well, who is born from us belongs to us. What you see in citizenship is that gradually, and again, in some polis we can trace this process much clearer than in others, but clearly, gradually, bit by bit, the practice of having your children belonging to you became much more formalized bit by bit, and I think that inheritance rights clearly played an enormous role in, say, the interaction between, say, birth, legitimacy, citizenship, and so on and so forth. That whole nexus, that was an enormous important point of, and you see this already in the earliest foundation decrees of colonies. What becomes defining is that you are the descendant of. Now, indeed, as in the last part of my talk, I mentioned this already, that as soon as birth, as a practical norm, gets solidified into law as the anchor of all the other laws, then you have a way that in a way becomes a very strong lead. Indeed, you see a path dependency developing for subsequent legislation, as I said, and in Athens, in my book, I have explained this quite in detail. In Athens, you see this very clearly, how bit by bit, also all the political structures of the polis, more and more get anchored on this idea of birthright. And so, yes, indeed, that is a very compelling model. And coming back to the questions of Alain, just when this kind of coalesced in the archaic period, we cannot always see that. We can only notice when it has happened in a way. And what went before was probably indeed more open and more flexible. But then at the point where we see it laid down in law, then it is clearly very much anchored.
If I can add something about the children's of citizens, I try to trace it in the use of the patronymic across the Greek world, and we see that quite early in various islands, for example, if I remember well, in Thera or something like that, and quite late in other places. And I propose that it might be a clue to the importance of this genealogy, this transmission of citizenship from father to son. But
right, yeah, I agree. And well, let's, as I said, I mean, that your children belong to the same group as you is more or less a universal phenomenon. We don't need to be very difficult about it. What is something we need to investigate is what particular shape it gets in ancient Greece and how the role it plays in construing citizenship as a much wider concept and much denser concept and so on and so forth. But it is almost well, a really universal phenomenon.
I think that's a wish by people to transmit one's status to your offspring, and that's universal, of course.
Yeah.
Any other question? Today we did work very well on citizenship, so we are maybe also tired. And at this point, so I thank again Josine Blok. I thank again all our speakers and the participants, and see you tomorrow at 9, 5 minutes, 5 minutes before. Thank you. And